The Grand Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished marble, its crystalline dome reaching toward the stars. Representatives from 247 species sat in their designated sections, each area carefully designed to accommodate different atmospheric needs and physical forms. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert thousands of different languages into something resembling universal understanding. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood at the human delegation podium, her simple black suit a stark contrast to the elaborate robes, exoskeletons, and energy fields worn by other representatives. Behind her, the small human contingent looked almost pathetic compared to the massive delegation surrounding them. 12 humans. 12 representatives for a species that had been part of the Galactic Council for exactly 53 years. The motion before us today, announced Praetor Vexthal, his 4 arms gesturing grandly as his translator converted his crystalline chimes into words, concerns the implementation of Directive 847b. All species must contribute 40% of their military forces to the Council Defense Fleet, effective immediately. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Zephyrians clicked their mandibles in approval. The Corvin delegation pulsed their bioluminescent approval patterns. Even the usually neutral ethereals shimmered their consent. Sarah remained silent, studying the data pad in her hands. The numbers were staggering. 40% of every species military. The directive meant the Council would control the largest military force in galactic history. She thought about Earth's small fleet of 300 ships, built over decades of careful resource management. We will begin with our most senior members, Praetor Vexthal continued. The hegemony of Klex has held Council membership for over 2 millennia. High Commanders are okay, your response? The massive insectoid representative rose, his chitinous armor gleaming under the chamber's lights. The hegemony pledges our full compliance. 40% of our forces, approximately 2 million vessels, will be transferred to Council command within the solar cycle. Approving sounds echoed throughout the chamber. 2 million ships. Sarah did quick mental calculations. If the average was even 1/10 of that number per species, the Council would control over 40 million military vessels. One by one, the senior members pledged their compliance. The Corvin Collective offered their bioships. The Synthetic Alliance promised their automated fleets. The Psionic Dominion would contribute their mind-controlled armadas. Excellent. Praetor Vexthal's satisfaction was evident even through the translator. Now we move to our junior members. These newer species have benefited greatly from Council protection and trade agreements. Their contribution will demonstrate their commitment to galactic stability. Sarah watched as the junior members were called. The aquatic depth dwellers pledged their submarine fleets. The silicon-based Crystallians offered their asteroid fortress ships. Each species eager to prove their loyalty, their worthiness to remain in the Council's good graces. Ambassador Chun of the Terran Republic, Praetor Vexthal finally called. Your species has enjoyed Council membership for 53 years. You have benefited from our trade networks, our protection, our knowledge sharing. The time has come for humanity to demonstrate its gratitude. Sarah stood slowly, her movements deliberate. The chamber fell silent, thousands of eyes, sensors, and consciousness fields focusing on the small human figure. Praetor Vexthal, honored representatives, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation network. Humanity appreciates the opportunity to address this august body. She paused, looking around the vast chamber. So many species, so many different forms of life, all gathered under one government. We have reviewed Directive 847. Be carefully. We understand its implications. Another pause, and we respectfully decline. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the eruption. Delegates leaped to their feet, tentacles or energy forms. Translation devices overloaded, trying to convert the cacophony of outrage into understandable language. Decline. Praetor Vexthal's voice cut through the chaos. No species declines a Council directive. There is no precedent. There is no procedure. Then, We're setting one, Sarah replied calmly. This is unprecedented insubordination, shouted the hegemony representative. The humans must be made to comply. Or perhaps, Sarah said, her voice still steady despite the storm around her, we should discuss what happens when a species chooses not to participate. The chamber erupted again, but Sarah noticed something interesting. Not all the delegates were shouting. Some were listening. Some were thinking. The consequences for defying council directives are severe, Praetor Vexthal warned. Sarah nodded slowly. We understand, which is why humanity will be withdrawing from council membership, effective immediately. The silence returned, heavier this time. We'll be going home now, Sarah said simply. But before we do, we'd like to share something with our former colleagues. A warning, you might call it the warning, came not as words, but as data. Sarah's aide, a young man named Marcus, activated a holographic display that materialized above the center of the chamber. Numbers began flowing across the projection, calculations, and statistics that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. These are projected casualty figures, Sarah explained, her voice cutting through the murmurs. What happens when you combine all the military forces in the galaxy under a single command structure? The hologram showed fleet compositions, tactical analyses, and something that made even the warlike hegemony delegation pause: estimated survival rates. Your species are used to control conflicts, Sarah continued. Border skirmishes, resource disputes, diplomatic wars with clear objectives, and negotiated endings. You fight until someone achieves their goals, then you stop. The projection shifted, showing historical battle data from hundreds of different species across thousands of years. Conflict duration, casualty percentages, territorial changes. The pattern was consistent across nearly every species represented. Humans don't fight that way, Sarah said quietly. The chamber had grown, eerily silent. Even Praetor Vexthal seemed focused on the data flowing above them. We've studied your military histories during our time here. The Corvin Hegemony War lasted 47 years and ended when both sides achieved acceptable territorial compromises. The Silicon Wars ran for 18 years until the Crystallians gained mining rights to the disputed systems. The Psionic Rebellion concluded after 12 years when the Dominion granted limited autonomy to the rebel systems. Sarah gestured to the hologram, which now showed Earth's history. The human species has been in a state of warfare for approximately 96% of its recorded history. Not border conflicts or resource disputes. Total warfare. The display showed numbers that made several delegates flinch. World War I, World War II, the countless smaller conflicts that had raged across Earth's continents. We don't fight for territory or resources primarily, Sarah continued. We fight for ideas, for concepts, for principles that can't be negotiated away or compromised on. And when we fight for those things, we don't stop until either we win completely or we're completely destroyed. Marcus activated another display showing more recent human conflicts. The Siege of Leningrad, the Pacific Island campaigns, Vietnam, Afghanistan. In our most recent global conflict, we developed weapons capable of sterilizing our entire planet. Then, we built enough of them to sterilize it several times over. Not for territorial gain, but because we disagreed about economic systems. The silence was becoming oppressive. Sarah could see the calculation happening in hundreds of different minds, each species trying to understand what they were hearing. You're creating the largest military force in galactic history, she said, her voice growing softer, more conversational. 40 million ships under unified command, standardized weapons, integrated communication systems, shared tactical databases. The hologram shifted again, showing the proposed council fleet composition. But you're doing it with species that have never faced total warfare. You're combining forces that have never fought an enemy committed to complete victory or complete annihilation. Sarah looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many delegates as possible. Humanity developed faster-than-light travel 48 years ago. We've been in space for less than 2 centuries. Most of you have been spacefaring for millennia. You have better technology, larger populations, more advanced sciences. She paused, letting that sink in. But in 53 years of council membership, we've studied every one of your species. Your tactics, your strategies, your military philosophies. And we've reached an uncomfortable conclusion. The chamber held its breath. If it came to total war between humanity and the rest of the council combined, we would lose. Eventually, the numbers are against us. But the casualties we would inflict in the process would be unacceptable to any rational species. Marcus brought up new data, projected conflict scenarios, computer simulations that have been running continuously since humanity joined the council. These simulations assume humanity fighting alone against the combined council forces. The projections are not encouraging for either side. The numbers spoke for themselves. Projected human losses, 97%. Projected council losses, 43%. Duration of conflict, estimated between 80 and 120 years. We're not threatening you, Sarah clarified, noting the alarmed sound from several delegations. We're warning you. You're about to create a military force larger than anything the galaxy has ever seen. But you're designing it using military philosophies that assume your enemies will fight like you do. She gestured to the hologram, which now showed a map of known space. There are things out there in the dark between galaxies. Ancient powers that went quiet long before most of your species achieved sentience. Entities that your oldest legends barely remember. The display shifted, showing deep space telemetry. Radio signals that followed known patterns. Gravitational anomalies that suggested massive structures moving in the void. Energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. Sooner or later, you're going to encounter something that doesn't fight by your rules. Something that doesn't negotiate, doesn't compromise, doesn't stop until it wins or dies. Sarah looked directly at Praetor Vexthal. When that day comes, your beautiful unified fleet is going to discover that there's a difference between being militarily advanced and being militarily effective. She gathered her papers, signaling the human delegation to prepare for departure. We're going home, but we'll be watching. And when the time comes, we'll be ready 18 months after humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council. The first reports began reaching Earth. Trade routes that had operated safely for centuries were going dark. Long-range communications from outer rim colonies simply stopped. Merchant vessels disappeared without distress signals or wreckage. Admiral Rebecca Torres stood in the Situation Room beneath Geneva, watching the holographic display that showed the galaxy's spiral arms. Red markers indicated systems that had gone silent. There were dozens of them now, scattered across the outer edges of known space. "Show me the pattern analysis," she ordered. The display shifted, and Lieutenant Commander Park manipulated the controls. Lines appeared connecting the dead systems, and a pattern emerged that made Torres's blood run cold. The attacks weren't random. Something was working its way inward, following specific routes. Estimated time to reach Council core worlds. Torres asked. Based on current progression, 18 months, Park replied. Maybe less if they speed up. Torres nodded grimly. The warnings humanity had given the Council were about to become reality. "Have we received any communications from the Council?" she asked. "Nothing official," Park responded. "But we're intercepting increased military communications. Fleet movements. Emergency sessions." The door to the Situation Room opened, and Director Chin entered. Sarah's sister had taken over humanity's intelligence coordination after the withdrawal from the Council. "Rebecca, we need to talk," Director Chin said. "We've got a problem." They moved to a secure conference room where Chun activated a privacy screen. 3 days ago, we detected a massive energy signature in the Wolf 359 system, Chun began. "Initially, we thought it was another attack. But the signature was wrong. Too organized. Too controlled." She activated her own display. It was the Council fleet, the entire unified force. 42 million vessels moving as a single unit. Torres studied the tactical display. The formation was impressive from a logistic standpoint, but strategically it looked like exactly what Sarah had warned about, a force designed by committee, built for traditional warfare. Where are they heading? Torres asked. Based on their current trajectory, they're moving to intercept whatever's been destroying the outer systems. They'll make contact in approximately 6 days. Torres felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. Have they attempted to establish communications with the enemy? Unknown. Our intelligence suggests they're operating under standard council protocols. Attempt diplomatic contact, establish negotiation parameters, find acceptable compromise. Jesus tohis mutirid. They still don't understand what they're facing. Shin brought up new data. That's not the worst part. We've been monitoring communications from the advancing force. Whatever's out there isn't sending warnings or demands. No territorial claims. No resource requirements. They're just advancing. The display showed the pattern of destruction. Systems weren't being occupied or harvested. They were being sterilized. Completely. Every artificial structure destroyed. Every technological signature eliminated. Every form of organized civilization erased. How long until we know the outcome of the Council's engagement? Torres asked. Assuming they engage immediately upon contact, we should have preliminary data within a week. Torres stood and walked to the window overlooking Geneva. The city looked peaceful and normal. People going about their daily lives, unaware that the galaxy might be about to change forever. Begin implementation of Protocol 7, she ordered. Chen's face went pale. Rebecca, are you sure? Protocol 7 was humanity's most classified defense plan. It had been developed during the years of Council membership, a contingency that assumed the worst possible scenario. Total galactic warfare, with humanity standing alone. I'm sure, Torres said. If the Council fleet fails, we need to be ready. Over the next 4 days, humanity transformed. Hidden shipyards that had been operating in secret for decades suddenly doubled their output. Research facilities that had been developing theoretical weapons began mass production. Every human settlement from Earth to the furthest colonies began implementation of wartime protocols that had been practiced but never used. The transformation was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. While other species built their militaries over centuries or millennia, humanity had developed the ability to shift from a peaceful civilization to a war machine in a matter of days. On the 5th day, the first reports came back from the engagement zone. Admiral, we're receiving scattered communications from Council vessels, Park reported. They're requesting immediate assistance. Torres closed her eyes. Show me. The communications were fragmentary, filled with panic and confusion. Council fleet commanders describing enemies that didn't respond to hails, didn't follow standard tactical patterns, didn't retreat when faced with superior numbers. Estimated casualties? Torres asked. From what we can piece together, the Council has lost approximately 60% of their fleet in the first engagement alone. Torres absorbed that information. 25 million ships destroyed in a single battle. It was the largest military disaster in galactic history. Are they retreating? She asked. No, ma'am. They're regrouping and preparing for a second engagement. Standard Council doctrine calls for escalation when diplomacy fails. Torres shook her head. The Council was about to learn the difference between traditional warfare and total warfare. They were facing an enemy that didn't care about casualties, didn't care about acceptable losses, didn't care about anything except complete victory. Admiral, Chen interrupted, we're receiving a priority communication from the Council. It's addressed specifically to humanity. Torres looked at the message header. It was from Praetor Vexthal himself. The message was simple. We understand the warning now. Help us. The emergency session of the Human Defense Council convened within hours of receiving Praetor Vexthal's message. Representatives from every human world, colony, and outpost participated via quantum link, their faces grim as they reviewed the intelligence reports from the Outer Rim. The situation is worse than we anticipated, Admiral Torres began, addressing the assembled leaders. The enemy force isn't just militarily superior. It's fundamentally different from anything we've seen before. Director Chen activated the intelligence display. We've analyzed the wreckage from the first engagement. The enemy ships are entirely automated. No life support systems, no crew quarters, no signs of biological or even artificial intelligence aboard. Their weapons platforms designed for a single purpose. President Harrison of the Terran Republic leaned forward. Are we looking at some kind of Berserker probe scenario? Worse, Chen replied. Berserker probes follow programmed parameters. These things adapt, learn, evolve their tactics in real time based on enemy responses. The display showed tactical analyses from the Council's failed engagement. The enemy had started with basic assault patterns, but within hours had developed countermeasures for every defensive strategy the Council deployed. They're not trying to conquer territory or claim resources, Torres continued. They're systematically eliminating all traces of technological civilization. And they're very good at it. Governor Martinez from the Centauri colonies spoke up. What about the Council's second engagement? Any word? Chen's expression darkened. It lasted 14 hours. The Council lost their remaining fleet except for scattered survivors. Total casualties are estimated at 38 million ships. The silence that followed was profound. 38 million vessels destroyed in 2 engagements. The largest military force in galactic history had been eliminated in less than a week. Praetor Vexthol's message included tactical data from both engagements, Torres said. The enemy force consists of approximately 2 million ships, but each one is roughly equivalent to 20 Council vessels in terms of firepower and defensive capability. So we're looking at effective parity with 4 million standard warships, calculated Admiral Kim from the Luna Defense Fleet. Those are manageable numbers. No, Torres shook her head. Those numbers assume the enemy fights like we do. They don't. They don't retreat when damaged. They don't preserve forces for future engagements. They don't care about supply lines or logistics. Every ship fights until it's completely destroyed, and they coordinate with perfect efficiency. Director Chun brought up new intelligence. We've also detected something else. The enemy force is expanding. They're not just destroying civilizations. They're harvesting the raw materials and building more ships. The implications sank in quickly. An enemy that grew stronger with each victory, that learned from each engagement, that had no interest in anything except complete annihilation of technological civilization. Estimated time until they reach the core worlds? Asked President Harrison. Based on current progression, 6 months, Torres replied. Less if they continue to accelerate their expansion. The debate that followed was intense. Some representatives argued for immediate evacuation of human space, fleeing to other galaxies before the enemy arrived. Others advocated for building defensive fortifications and hoping the enemy would bypass human territory for more attractive targets. Admiral Torres waited until the arguments died down before speaking again. There's another option, she said quietly. We could fight. Rebecca, President Harrison said carefully, you just told us that 40 million Council ships couldn't stop 2 million enemy vessels. Humanity has maybe 30,000 ships in total. Yes, Torres agreed. But we have advantages the Council didn't. She activated a new display showing human military doctrine. The Council fought a traditional engagement. They tried to preserve their forces, maintain strategic reserves, protect supply lines. They fought the way civilized species fight. The display shifted to show human tactical principles. We don't have those limitations. Human military doctrine is based on total warfare. Every ship fights until destroyed. Every resource is expendable. Every advantage is exploited regardless of cost. You're talking about matching the enemy's own tactics, observed Governor Martinez. Exactly, but we have something they don't, creativity. They adapt to enemy tactics, but their adaptation follows logical patterns. Humans don't fight logically. We fight desperately. Torres brought up the classified data from Protocol 7. For the past 18 months, we've been preparing for exactly this scenario. Not because we expected this specific enemy, but because we knew that sooner or later we'd face something that couldn't be negotiated with. The display showed humanity's hidden preparations, production facilities that existed in deep space, far from any inhabited system, weapons platforms that violated several council treaties humanity was no longer bound by, ship designs that prioritized maximum destructive capability over crew survival. We've been building a military designed to fight an enemy that can't be reasoned with, Torres continued. The Council built their fleet to project power and maintain order. We've built ours to kill efficiently and die taking the enemy with us. Director Chun added new data. We've also been studying every military conflict in galactic history. The enemy can adapt to logical tactical responses, but human warfare isn't logical. We develop strategies that don't make sense from a rational standpoint, but work because the enemy can't predict irrational behavior. What are you proposing? President Harrison asked. We honor the Council's request for assistance, Torres replied. Not because we owe them anything, but because if we don't stop this enemy now, they'll eventually reach us anyway. And by then, they'll have harvested the resources of hundreds of civilizations. She paused, looking around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. But we do it our way. No unified command structure. No council oversight. No diplomatic restrictions. We fight a human war against an enemy that only understands total conflict. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would stand and fight, but on their own terms, using their own methods, following their own doctrine. The message sent back to Praetor Vexthul was simple. Help is coming. Stay alive until we arrive. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace near the Kepler 442 system was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 30,000 ships, but each one built according to principles that would have horrified Council military strategists. No standardos designs. No unified command protocols. Ships that looked like they had been cobbled together from spare parts and desperate ingenuity. Some vessels appeared to be little more than engines strapped to the largest weapons humanity could build. Others were clearly converted civilian craft with military systems grafted onto their hulls. Admiral Torres commanded from the bridge of the UES Defiance, a ship that exemplified human military philosophy. Built around a single massive weapons system, it had minimal crew quarters, no diplomatic facilities, and armor that was designed to hold together just long enough to deliver its payload. Admiral, we're receiving communications from surviving Council forces, reported Commander Park. They're requesting tactical coordination and unified command structure. Negative, Torres replied immediately. Inform them that human forces will coordinate with their operations, but will not integrate command structures. We fight alongside them, not under them. The strategic situation was grim. The enemy force had grown to nearly 3 million ships after harvesting the destroyed Council fleets. They were systematically advancing through the inner rim systems, leaving nothing but sterilized worlds in their wake. Enemy force detected at bearing 27 Mark IV, announced the tactical officer. Range, 8 million kilometers, and closing. Torres studied the display. The enemy maintained perfect formation, their ships advancing in a pattern that suggested flawless coordination and communication. It was exactly what human strategists had expected. All ships implement Doctrine Alpha 7, Torres commanded. What happened next defied every principle of civilized warfare. Instead of forming defensive lines or maintaining formation integrity, the human fleet scattered. Ships broke off individually or in small groups, each one following seemingly random vectors that made no tactical sense. The enemy force adapted quickly, adjusting their formation to account for the scattered human positions. Their tactical programs calculated optimal engagement patterns based on the assumption that human forces would eventually reorganize into coherent battle groups. They were wrong. Vessel Revenge, reporting weapons lock on enemy formation center, came the first tactical report. Firebase 7 has clear targeting solution on enemy command cluster, reported another. The human ships weren't scattering randomly. They were positioning themselves according to a doctrine that prioritized maximum damage over survival or tactical advantage. Each ship was maneuvering to a position where it could inflict the greatest possible casualties before being destroyed. All ships, execute on my mark, Torres commanded. Remember, we're not trying to win a battle. We're trying to break their adaptation algorithms. The engagement began with humanity doing something no rational military force would attempt: a simultaneous suicide attack by 30,000 vessels. Every human ship opened fire at maximum range with weapons that had been overcharged beyond safe operating parameters. Ships that normally carried enough ammunition for extended engagements had instead loaded every available space with explosives and projectiles, planning to expend their entire arsenal in minutes. The result was devastating. Human vessels began exploding almost immediately as their overcharged weapons systems failed catastrophically. But each explosion was directed and controlled, turning the ships themselves into massive fragmentation weapons that scattered debris across millions of cubic kilometers. The enemy force found itself facing something their tactical programs couldn't process: an opponent that was deliberately destroying itself to inflict maximum damage. Enemy formation is disrupted, reported the tactical officer. They're trying to maintain cohesion while adapting to our attack pattern. Good, Torres replied, watching as her own ship's weapons systems showed critical overload warnings. Execute Phase 2. Phase 2 was even more irrational. The surviving human ships, many of them heavily damaged and venting atmosphere, began ramming attacks against the largest enemy vessels. But these weren't desperate last stands. Each ramming attack was precisely calculated to cause cascading failures in enemy formations. Human ships targeted specific weak points identified through months of analysis, using themselves as guided weapons to cripple enemy vessels. UES Vengeance, successful ram on enemy dreadnought, came a report. Target destroyed, massive secondary explosions detected. Firebase 12 reporting successful penetration of enemy defensive screen. Initiating core detonation. Torres watched the tactical display as human casualties mounted rapidly. They were losing ships at an unsustainable rate, but the enemy force was taking damage unlike anything they had experienced before. Admiral, we're detecting something unusual, Park reported. Enemy ships are beginning to show erratic behavior patterns. Torres smiled grimly. They're trying to adapt to irrational tactics. Show me their formation analysis. The display revealed what humanity had hoped for. The enemy's adaptive algorithms were struggling to develop countermeasures for an opponent that didn't follow logical military principles. Their formation patterns were becoming increasingly chaotic as they tried to predict human actions that made no sense from a strategic standpoint. Begin Phase 3, Torres ordered. The final phase was the most human thing of all. In the midst of total destruction, with their fleet mostly eliminated and facing impossible odds, the surviving human ships stopped fighting and started talking. This is Admiral Torres to all enemy vessels. She broadcast on all frequencies. We know you can learn. We know you adapt. So here's what you need to understand about humanity. Her ship was dying around her, systems failing as the overcharged weapons had finally burned through critical components. But her message continued. You've eliminated our fleet. You've proven you're militarily superior. Congratulations. But you've also just learned something about human warfare that no amount of tactical analysis could teach you. On the tactical display, the enemy force had stopped advancing. Their ships hung motionless in space, possibly processing the unprecedented data from an engagement unlike any in their experience. We didn't come here to win, Torres continued. We came here to teach you a lesson. Every human ship you destroyed was a lesson. Every irrational tactic was a lesson. Every suicide attack was a lesson. She paused, looking around her bridge at the crew members who had volunteered for what everyone knew was a one-way mission. The lesson is this. There are things in this galaxy that will fight you the way we just fought you. Not for territory or resources or logical objectives, but for principles you can't understand and won't be able to adapt to. And when you encounter those things, your perfect tactical algorithms won't save you. The message ended as the Defiance finally succumbed to its damage and exploded in a brilliant flash. But the effect on the enemy force was unprecedented. For the first time since their advance began, they stopped moving forward. The tactical data from their engagement with humanity had introduced variables their programming couldn't process. 3 days later, the enemy force withdrew, not defeated in any traditional sense, but fundamentally changed by their encounter with a species that fought wars differently than any other in the galaxy. The surviving council representatives who had witnessed the battle from long range would spend years trying to understand what they had seen. Humanity had sacrificed 30,000 ships to teach an unstoppable enemy a single lesson: that there are some opponents who can't be calculated, predicted, or reasoned with. When the next council convened 6 months later, the first item on their agenda was a unanimous vote to restore humanity's membership with full honors. The second item was a request for humanity to share their military doctrine with all council species. Ambassador Sarah Chun, resuming her position at the human delegation podium, politely declined the second request. Some things, she told the assembled representatives, are better learned through experience. The Grand Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished marble, its crystalline dome reaching toward the stars. Representatives from 247 species sat in their designated sections, each area carefully designed to accommodate different atmospheric needs and physical forms. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert thousands of different languages into something resembling universal understanding. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood at the human delegation podium, her simple black suit a stark contrast to the elaborate robes, exoskeletons, and energy fields worn by other representatives. Behind her, the small human contingent looked almost pathetic compared to the massive delegation surrounding them. Wulbomans, 12 representatives for a species that had been part of the Galactic Council for exactly 53 years. The motion before us today, announced Praetor Vexthal, his 4 arms gesturing grandly as his translator converted his crystalline chimes into words, concerns the implementation of Directive 847B. All species must contribute 40% of their military forces to the Council Defense Fleet, effective immediately. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Zephyrians clicked their mandibles in approval. The Corvin delegation pulsed their bioluminescent approval patterns. Even the usually neutral ethereals shimmered their consent. Sarah remained silent, studying the data pad in her hands. The numbers were staggering. 40% of every species military. The directive meant the Council would control the largest military force in galactic history. She thought about Earth's small fleet of 300 ships, built over decades of careful resource management. We will begin with our most senior members, Praetor Vexthal continued. The hegemony of Klex has held Council membership for over 2 millennia. High Commander Zarok, your response? The massive insectoid representative rose, his chitinous armor gleaming under the chamber's lights. The hegemony pledges our full compliance. 40% of our forces, approximately 2 million vessels, will be transferred to Council command within the solar cycle. Approving sounds echoed throughout the chamber. 2 million ships. Sarah did quick mental calculations. If the average was even 1/10 of that number per species, the Council would control over 40 million military vessels. One by one, the senior members pledged their compliance. The Corvin Collective offered their bioships. The Synthetic Alliance promised their automated fleets. The Psionic Dominion would contribute their mind-controlled armadas. Excellent. Praetor Vexthal's satisfaction was evident even through the translator. Now we move to our junior members. These newer species have benefited greatly from Council protection and trade agreements. Their contribution will demonstrate their commitment to galactic stability. Sarah watched as the junior members were called. The aquatic depth dwellers pledged their submarine fleets. The silicon-based Crystallians offered their asteroid fortress ships. Each species eager to prove their loyalty their worthiness to remain in the Council's good graces. Ambassador Chun of the Terran Republic, Praetor Vexthul, finally called. Your species has enjoyed Council membership for 53 years. You have benefited from our trade networks, our protection, our knowledge sharing. The time has come for humanity to demonstrate its gratitude. Sarah stood slowly, her movements deliberate. The chamber fell silent, thousands of eyes, sensors, and consciousness fields focusing on the small human figure. Praetor Vexthul, honored representatives, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation network. Humanity appreciates the opportunity to address this august body. She paused, looking around the vast chamber. So many species, so many different forms of life, all gathered under one government. We have reviewed Directive 847, be carefully. We understand its implications. Another pause, and we respectfully decline. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the eruption. Delegates leaped to their feet, tentacles or energy forms. Translation devices overloaded, trying to convert the cacophony of outrage into understandable language. Decline. Praetor Vexthul's voice cut through the chaos. No species declines a council directive. There is no precedent. There is no procedure. Then, we're setting one, Sarah replied calmly. This is unprecedented insubordination, shouted the hegemony representative. The humans must be made to comply. Or perhaps, Sarah said, her voice still steady despite the storm around her, we should discuss what happens when a species chooses not to participate. The chamber erupted again, but Sarah noticed something interesting. Not all the delegates were shouting. Some were listening. Some were thinking. The consequences for defying council directives are severe, Praetor Vexthul warned. Sarah nodded slowly. We understand, which is why humanity will be withdrawing from council membership, effective immediately. The silence returned, heavier this time. We'll be going home now, Sarah said simply. But before we do, we'd like to share something with our former colleagues. A warning, you might call it.